The bitter wind howled through the cracks of Vincent Lawson's weathered barn, rattling the wooden beams like skeletal fingers on a winter night. It was December 1878, and the Arizona Territory had fallen victim to one of the harshest winters in memory. The remote settlement of Castle Dome, nestled in the mountains where silver and lead mines had drawn hopeful souls, had never felt so isolating to Vincent as it did tonight. Vincent secured the last of his horses in their stalls, his breath creating ghost-like clouds in the freezing air. At 32, he'd spent the last decade alone on this small ranch since returning from the war, his only companions the livestock he tended, and occasional visitors from town, who needed his skills with injured animals or broken equipment. Folks called him the silent helper, always ready to lend a hand, but never one to linger for conversation. The lantern swung from his grip, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor as he made his final check before heading to his cabin. That's when he heard a soft rustling from the back corner of the barn, near where he stored extra feed for the winter. "Who's there?" Vincent called out, his voice rough from disuse. His free hand moved instinctively to the revolver at his hip. When no answer came, he approached cautiously, raising the lantern higher. The light fell upon a bundle of burlap and what appeared to be rags, until the bundle shifted slightly. Vincent knelt down, pushing aside the makeshift covering to reveal a woman, her face pale as moonlight, lips blue with cold. Her dark hair was matted with snow and ice, and her threadbare dress offered little protection against the elements. "Madam," he whispered, touching her shoulder gently. Her eyes fluttered open, deep brown eyes that held both fear and determination in equal measure. She tried to speak, but could only manage a shivering breath. Vincent didn't hesitate. He set down his lantern and gathered the freezing woman into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, and he could feel her violent trembling through her sodden clothes. "I'm taking you to my cabin," he said firmly. "You'll freeze to death out here." As he turned toward the barn door, her ice-cold fingers clutched weakly at his coat. Her voice came as barely a whisper, each word requiring tremendous effort. "I'll be your wife. If you let me stay." Vincent froze mid-step, staring down at the desperate woman in his arms. 1,000 questions raced through his mind, but the howling wind outside and her deteriorating condition made them all irrelevant. Whatever her story, whatever had driven her to his barn and this desperate proposal, could wait until she wasn't at death's door. "Let's get you warm first," he said gruffly, and pushed through the barn door into the swirling snow. The 50 yards between barn and cabin had never seemed so long. By the time Vincent kicked open his front door, the woman had lost consciousness, her head lolling against his chest. He laid her gently on his bed and quickly built up the fire in the small stone hearth, adding extra logs to chase away the pervasive chill. In the flickering firelight, he could see her more clearly. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with features that might have been lovely if not ravaged by cold and exhaustion. Her clothes were soaked through, and Vincent realized with growing alarm that she would never warm up while wearing them. "Forgive me, madam," he muttered, though she couldn't hear him. He found his cleanest shirt and a pair of wool trousers, then turned his back as he removed her frozen dress and undergarments, working as quickly and respectfully as possible. He dressed her in his oversized clothes, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and pulled his single chair close to the fire to keep watch. Outside, the storm intensified, snow piling against the cabin walls as if nature itself was trying to bury them alive. Vincent stoked the fire and waited, wondering what circumstances had brought this mysterious woman to his doorstep with such a strange proposition. Hours passed before she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened fully as she took in her surroundings with evident confusion. When her gaze settled on Vincent, fear flashed across her face. "You're safe," he said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I found you half frozen in my barn. Do you remember?" She swallowed hard, looking around the simple cabin at the crackling fire, the rough-hewn furniture, the single bed she occupied. Slowly, recognition dawned in her eyes. "I remember," she said, her voice stronger but still hoarse. "You carried me." Vincent nodded, pouring a cup of coffee from the pot he'd kept warming. He approached carefully and offered it to her. "Can you sit up? This will help warm you from inside." She struggled upright, clutching the blankets around her shoulders, and accepted the steaming cup with trembling hands. "What's your name?" he asked after she'd taken a few sips. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to tell the truth. "Olivia," she finally said. "Olivia Norwood. Vincent Lawson," he replied. "This is my ranch, such as it is." Olivia nodded, her eyes darting to the windows where snow still pelted the glass. Am I still welcome to stay?" Vincent cleared his throat uncomfortably. "About what you said in the barn." Her cheeks, already pink from the fire's heat, darkened further. "I meant it," she said with quiet dignity. "I have nowhere else to go and winter's set in. I can cook, clean, mend, whatever you need. I'd be a proper wife." "Miss Norwood, I can't take advantage, it's Mrs." she interrupted, then bit her lip. "Or it was. My husband died 3 months ago." "Consumption." Vincent's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss." She looked away. "Don't be. Oliver Norwood was not a kind man." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Vincent didn't press for details, but he understood enough. Many women found themselves in impossible situations after losing husbands, especially if those husbands had left debts or enemies behind. "You can stay," he said finally, "but not as my wife. As my guest, until you're recovered and the weather breaks. Then we can discuss what comes next." Relief washed over Olivia's face, followed quickly by wariness. "Why would you help me without asking anything in return?" The question stung, though Vincent understood why she'd ask it. "My mother raised me better than that," he said simply. "Now get some rest. We'll talk more in the morning." Vincent made himself a pallet on the floor near the fire and tried to sleep, but his mind kept returning to the woman in his bed and her desperate offer. What kind of life had she fled that made becoming the wife of a stranger seem like salvation? Morning arrived with blinding brightness as sunlight reflected off the snow-covered landscape outside. The storm had passed, but it had left behind nearly 3 feet of snow, effectively isolating the ranch from town. Vincent woke to the smell of coffee and cornbread. He sat up to find Olivia at his small stove, his shirt hanging loosely on her slender frame as she worked. "You should be resting," he said, getting to his feet. She glanced over her shoulder. "I've imposed enough already. Breakfast is the least I can do." "It's not an imposition if I invited you to stay." "After I invited myself into your barn," she countered with the ghost of a smile. The cornbread was golden and perfect, better than anything Vincent had made for himself in years. They ate in awkward silence until he finally spoke. "How did you end up in my barn, Mrs. Norwood?" Olivia set down her cup. "I was traveling north from Tucson. The wagon I was riding in broke an axle about 5 miles back. The driver said we were close to Castle Dome and he'd go for help, but—" She shrugged. "He never returned. When the storm began, I followed the fence line until I found your barn. 5 miles in that weather. It's a miracle you survived." "I've survived worse," she said quietly. Vincent recognized the tone. He'd heard it from men who'd seen too much in the war. He decided not to push further today. "The town snowed in," he said instead. "Might be a few days before the pass clears, but I've got supplies enough and you're welcome to stay." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson." "Vincent," he corrected. "Vincent," she repeated softly. "And I'm Olivia." Over the next 3 days, the snow began to melt, but not enough to clear the path to town. Vincent and Olivia fell into an unexpected rhythm. She took over the cooking and mending while he tended the livestock and chopped extra wood. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, at first in awkward silence, then gradually sharing small stories from their lives. Vincent told her about growing up in Missouri, about his service in the war, and his journey west afterward seeking solitude and a fresh start. He didn't mention the nightmares that still plagued him or the grief he carried for his fallen comrades. Olivia spoke of her childhood in Kansas, her talent for music, and her dreams of teaching piano. She carefully avoided any mention of her late husband beyond his name and death. On the fourth night, as they finished a dinner of rabbit stew, Vincent finally asked the question that had been on his mind since finding her. "Why did you offer to be my wife? The truth, please." Olivia's hand stilled in her lap. "Because marriage, even to a stranger, offers protection that a single woman doesn't have." She met his eyes. "And because you have kind eyes." "Kind eyes," he repeated, unsure whether to laugh. "You'd be surprised how rare that is," she said seriously. "I can read men, Vincent. I had to learn." "And what else do you read in me?" "Loneliness," she said without hesitation. "Same as me." Vincent couldn't deny it. The isolation he'd once sought as a balm had become its own kind of prison over the years. "What will you do when the snow clears?" he asked. Olivia looked into the fire. "Continue north, I suppose. I have a cousin in Idaho who might take me in. And if she doesn't, then I'll find work somewhere. I'm not afraid of hard work." Vincent nodded slowly. "You could stay here," he offered, surprising himself. "Not as my wife," he added quickly. "But I've got a small cabin behind the barn that used to house a ranch hand. It needs work, but it would be yours until you decide what's next." Olivia studied him with those perceptive brown eyes. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he said. "And because it gets mighty quiet out here in winter." The next day, they trudged through melting snow to examine the abandoned cabin. It was little more than a single room with a small hearth, but the roof was sound and the walls sturdy. Olivia walked around the space, touching the dusty window ledge, the simple wooden table. "It's perfect," she declared. Together they cleaned it out, repaired the door hinges, and brought over bedding and supplies. By sunset, it was habitable if not comfortable. "It'll warm up once the fire's been going a while," Vincent said, lighting the kindling in the hearth. "And tomorrow I'll bring over some of the preserves from the root cellar." Olivia placed a hand on his arm. "Thank you, Vincent. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "No need," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Get some rest. Tomorrow we can ride into town if the road's clear enough." The path to Castle Dome was passable by horseback the following morning. Vincent saddled his most gentle mare and helped Olivia mount behind him. The ride was awkward at first, with Olivia trying to maintain a proper distance despite the necessity of holding onto Vincent's waist. "You'll fall off if you keep sitting like that," he finally said. "I promise I don't bite." Olivia relaxed slightly, allowing herself to hold on more securely as they navigated the muddy, snow-patched trail. The closeness felt strange to Vincent after so many years of solitude, but not unpleasant. Castle Dome was a small mining settlement, nothing more than a main street with a general store, saloon, a assay office, and a handful of other businesses servicing the nearby mines. As they rode in, Vincent was acutely aware of the stares they attracted. He rarely came to town except for supplies, and never in the company of a woman. They dismounted in front of Garrison's general store. Vincent tied up the mare and offered Olivia his arm as they navigated the muddy street. "I should warn you," he murmured. "Folks here are curious by nature and they haven't seen me with company in, well, ever. Should I expect pitchforks and torches?" Olivia asked with a small smile. "Nothing so dramatic, just questions. Lots of questions." The bell above Garrison's door announced their arrival. The store was warm and smelled of coffee, tobacco, and the pungent scent of oiled leather. George Garrison, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers, looked up from his ledger, surprise evident on his ruddy face. "Vincent Lawson, as I live and breathe," he exclaimed. "Thought that storm might have buried you out at that ranch of yours." His curious gaze shifted to Olivia. "And who might this lovely lady be?" "This is Mrs. Olivia Norwood," Vincent said. "She's staying at my place for a while." Garrison's eyebrows shot up toward his receding hairline. "Is that so? Well, welcome to Castle Dome, Mrs. Norwood. Any friend of Vincent's is a friend of mine, though I didn't know he had any." "We only recently became acquainted," Olivia said smoothly. "Mr. Lawson kindly offered shelter when my transportation arrangements fell through during the storm." Vincent handed Garrison his list of supplies, grateful for Olivia's tactful explanation that wasn't entirely a lie. While Garrison filled the order, they browsed the store. Vincent noticed Olivia lingering near a display of fabric bolts, her fingers trailing over a soft blue calico. "Need anything for yourself?" he asked quietly. She withdrew her hand as if caught doing something wrong. "No, I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition," he interrupted. "You can't keep wearing my old shirts." Before she could protest further, he called to Garrison, "Add 3 yards of that blue calico and whatever notions the lady needs for sewing." Olivia's eyes widened. "Vincent, that's too generous. Consider it an advance on your cabin repairs," he said. Hard to fix up a place looking like a scarecrow. Their exchange was interrupted by the entrance of Sheriff Thomas Blackburn, whose weathered face registered surprise at the sight of Vincent and even more at Olivia beside him. "Lawson," he greeted with a nod. "Madam." His sharp eyes took in Olivia's oversized borrowed clothes and Vincent's protective stance beside her. Vincent had always respected Blackburn, who kept order in Castle Dome without unnecessary force or favoritism. "Sheriff," he acknowledged. "This is Mrs. Olivia Norwood, recently widowed. She's staying at my ranch until the weather improves." Blackburn's expression remained neutral, but his eyes were assessing. "Mrs. Norwood, sorry for your loss. Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" "Idaho, eventually," Olivia replied. "I have family there." "Long journey for a lady alone," the sheriff observed. "I'm managing, thank you." Garrison returned with their supplies bundled and ready. Vincent paid, including extra for the fabric and sewing items Olivia had selected with reluctance. As they prepared to leave, Blackburn stepped closer. "Word of advice, Lawson. Folks talk in small towns. Might want to bring the lady to Sunday service, let people meet her proper. Stop speculation." Vincent nodded, understanding the sheriff's meaning. Castle Dome wasn't a place of rigid propriety like eastern cities, but even here, a single man and woman living in proximity raised eyebrows. "Much obliged, Sheriff," he said, and guided Olivia outside. Once they were on horseback and headed back to the ranch, Olivia spoke. "I'm causing you difficulties." "Nothing I can't handle," Vincent assured her. "Blackburn's right, though. Might be good for you to meet some of the women in town, make some connections." "You think I'll need allies," she observed. "Everyone needs allies," he replied. When they reached the ranch, Vincent helped unload their supplies. As Olivia sorted through the items for her cabin, he noticed her hands lingering on the blue calico fabric, a soft expression on her face. "Been a while since you had something nice," he guessed. Olivia nodded. Oliver didn't believe in fripperies, as he called them. She shook out the fabric, admiring it in the light. "This is the first new dress material I'll have had in 3 years." Vincent felt a surge of anger toward the dead man he'd never met. "Well, make it as fancy as you please. No one here to stop you." That evening, after they'd shared another meal in Vincent's cabin, Olivia returned to her small dwelling with her sewing supplies. Vincent found himself missing her presence as he sat alone by his fire, the cabin somehow emptier than it had felt before her arrival. The next day, Vincent took care of ranch chores in the morning, then rode out to check his fence line for damage from the storm. When he returned in late afternoon, he was surprised to see smoke rising from Olivia's cabin chimney and the warm glow of lamplight in her window. He hesitated, then decided to check that she had everything she needed. As he approached, he heard something that stopped him in his tracks: music. Not from any instrument, but Olivia's voice, clear and sweet, singing a ballad he vaguely remembered from before the war. Vincent stood transfixed, unwilling to interrupt and announce his presence. When the song ended, he waited a moment, then knocked on the door. Olivia opened it, looking flushed and pleased with herself. She wore a simply cut dress of the blue calico, fitted to her slender frame. With her dark hair pulled back neatly and color in her cheeks, she looked transformed from the half-frozen woman he'd found in his barn. "You finished it already," he said, impressed. "I've had plenty of practice making do with little," she replied, stepping back to let him in. "What do you think?" "It suits you," Vincent said, suddenly aware of how lovely she was. "Blue's a good color for you." Olivia smoothed the skirt, looking pleased. "Thank you. It feels good to be in proper clothes again." She gestured to the small table where she'd set out 2 plates. "I hope you don't mind, but I borrowed some of the supplies to make dinner. I thought, maybe you'd join me, to thank you for everything." Vincent was touched by the gesture. The cabin was cozy now, with the fire crackling and the small space neatly arranged. She'd even found an old jar and filled it with dried prairie grasses as a centerpiece. "I'd be honored," he said, removing his hat. They ate rabbit stew and cornbread, and Vincent realized it was the first time he'd dined in company at a proper table in years. Afterward, Olivia surprised him by pulling out a small harmonica. "I found this while cleaning," she explained. "Do you play?" Vincent shook his head. "Previous ranch hand must have left it behind." "May I?" she asked, and when he nodded, she raised the instrument to her lips and began to play a gentle, wistful tune. Vincent watched her, captivated by the transformation music brought to her face. The worry lines smoothed away, replaced by a serene joy. When she finished, he found himself wanting to hear more. "You said you used to teach piano," he asked. Olivia nodded, her expression growing distant. "Before I married, my father insisted I learn, said it would make me more marriageable. It was the one thing he gave me that I truly loved." "You're very talented. Thank you." She set the harmonica down carefully. "Music has always been my comfort, even when—" She trailed off. "Even when things were bad with your husband," Vincent guessed gently. Olivia's eyes met his, assessing whether he was truly someone she could confide in. Something in his expression must have reassured her. "Oliver was charming when we courted," she began. "My father had just died, leaving substantial debts, and Oliver seemed like salvation. He was handsome, established, and he promised I could continue my music." Her fingers traced the edge of the table. "But once we were married, everything changed. He controlled every aspect of my life, what I wore, who I spoke to, when I could leave the house. He sold my father's piano within a month of our wedding." Vincent felt a cold anger building in his chest. "Did he hurt you?" Olivia hesitated. "Not at first. He preferred other methods: isolation, humiliation, taking away anything that brought me joy." Her voice hardened. The physical cruelty came later when those tactics weren't enough to break me completely. "I'm sorry," Vincent said, inadequate words for such suffering. "When he contracted consumption, I nursed him dutifully," Olivia continued. "His family watched like hawks, making sure the obedient wife performed her role to the end. After he died, they made it clear I wasn't welcome to stay. His brother inherited everything: the house, the business, even my personal belongings. I left Tucson with only what I could carry." Vincent struggled to find words. "You survived," he finally said. "That takes courage." "Or desperation," she countered, then shook her head as if clearing away dark thoughts. "Enough of that. Tell me about your horses. I noticed you have quite a few for a small ranch." Vincent accepted the change of subject, explaining how he'd developed a sideline breeding and training horses, particularly for endurance riding. As the evening wore on, their conversation flowed more naturally, and Vincent found himself laughing for the first time in months at Olivia's dry observations about town life. When it grew late, Vincent reluctantly rose to leave. At the door, he turned back. "Sunday's 2 days away. Blackburn was right about church, would you? That is, if you wanted to go, I could take you." Olivia smiled. "I'd like that, thank you." Vincent nodded, suddenly awkward. "Good night, then." "Good night, Vincent." As he walked back to his cabin under a star-filled sky, Vincent realized something had shifted between them. Olivia's story had awakened protective instincts he'd thought long buried, but there was something else too: a warmth in his chest when she smiled, a lightness he felt in her presence. It both attracted and alarmed him. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Vincent wore his one good shirt and tried unsuccessfully to tame his unruly dark hair. When he knocked on Olivia's door, she emerged in her blue dress with a borrowed shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You look nice," he said, offering his arm. "So do you," she replied with a small smile. The ride to Castle Dome's small church was quiet, both of them nervous about the reception they might receive. Vincent hadn't attended services regularly in years, appearing only for funerals and the occasional Christmas service. He felt acutely self-conscious as they dismounted before the white clapboard building where townspeople were already gathering. Reverend Phillips, a lean man with kind eyes, spotted them immediately. "Vincent Lawson," he said warmly, extending his hand. "A pleasant surprise. And who is your companion?" "Reverend, this is Mrs. Olivia Norwood," Vincent said. "She's staying at my ranch temporarily while traveling north." "Mrs. Norwood, welcome to our humble congregation," the Reverend said. "Please come inside. We're about to begin." Vincent was acutely aware of the curious glances as he escorted Olivia to a pew. Most were merely interested, though he noticed a few disapproving looks from some of the older women. The service itself was simple and comforting. Vincent found himself watching Olivia more than listening to the sermon. She sang the hymns with quiet confidence, her voice blending beautifully with the congregation. During prayers, her expression was one of genuine peace, not the performative piety he'd observed in others. After the service, several people approached them. Margaret Garrison, the storekeeper's wife, was the first to introduce herself to Olivia. "My husband mentioned you," she said. "You poor dear, caught in that terrible storm. How fortunate Mr. Lawson found you." "Indeed," Olivia agreed. "He's been most gracious." "We're having a quilting circle on Tuesday," Margaret continued. "You should join us. Nothing like needlework and conversation to make a person feel at home." Vincent was relieved to see several other women extend similar invitations. Even Sheriff Blackburn nodded approvingly from across the churchyard. Not everyone was welcoming, however. Hester Winters, a widow known for her sharp tongue, made a point of speaking loudly as they passed. "Standards certainly have changed in Castle Dome. Time was. A decent woman wouldn't stay unchaperoned with a bachelor, no matter how dire the circumstances. Vincent felt Olivia stiffen beside him. Before he could respond, Margaret Garrison intervened. "Hester Winters, you ought to be ashamed," she scolded. "Mrs. Norwood is a respectable widow traveling to family. Would you have had Vincent leave her to freeze?" Hester sniffed dismissively but said no more. Vincent guided Olivia away, his hand at the small of her back. "I'm sorry about that," he murmured. "Don't be," Olivia replied. "There's always at least one Hester Winters in every town." Despite that unpleasantness, the morning had gone better than Vincent expected. As they rode home, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "You made quite an impression," he told Olivia. "I've never seen Margaret Garrison take to someone so quickly." "People are often kind if you give them the chance," Olivia said. "Besides, they were more curious about you than me, the hermit rancher suddenly appearing with a woman." "I'm surprised they didn't charge admission." Vincent laughed, surprised at how easily she could lift his mood. "I'm not a hermit. Of course not. You just happen to live alone miles from town and rarely speak to anyone, when you put it that way." They shared a smile, and Vincent felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, perhaps. For what, he wasn't yet ready to examine too closely. The following weeks fell into a comfortable pattern. Olivia attended the quilting circle and quickly became friendly with several women from town. Vincent found himself making more frequent trips to Castle Dome, using the excuse of supplies but really accompanying Olivia, who bloomed in the company of others after her years of isolation. At the ranch, they developed an easy routine. They took meals together, sometimes in his cabin, sometimes in hers. In the evenings, Olivia often played the harmonica while Vincent whittled or repaired tack. They talked about everything and nothing: books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd once had. Winter began to loosen its grip on the land. Green shoots appeared in sheltered spots, and the days grew longer. Vincent knew that soon the roads north would be passable, and Olivia would have no reason to delay her journey to Idaho. The thought filled him with a hollow dread he couldn't ignore. One evening in early March, as they sat by the fire in his cabin after dinner, Vincent finally voiced what had been on his mind. "Spring's coming," he said, trying to sound casual. "You'll be able to travel soon if that's still your plan." Olivia's hand stilled in her lap. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose I will." "You still have money for the stagecoach fare," she nodded. "What I had hidden in my boot when I arrived, plus what Margaret paid me for helping with the store inventory." Vincent stared into the fire, searching for words. "You know, Castle Dome could use a music teacher. Several families have mentioned it since hearing you at church." Olivia looked up, surprise evident in her expression. "Are you suggesting I stay in town?" "I'm suggesting you stay here," Vincent said, the words tumbling out before he could reconsider. "At the ranch, with me." The silence that followed seemed endless. Vincent couldn't bring himself to look at her, afraid of what he might see. "In what capacity?" Olivia finally asked, her voice carefully neutral. Vincent gathered his courage and met her gaze. "When you first came, you offered to be my wife. I refused because you were desperate and had no choice. But now you do have choices. You could go to Idaho, stay in town, travel elsewhere entirely." He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I'm asking you to stay because these past weeks have been the happiest I've known in years. Because when I think of you leaving, I can't breathe. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Norwood." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. "Vincent, you don't have to answer now," he rushed to say. "It's a lot to consider. I know my ranch isn't much and I'm not a wealthy man, but I promise you'd never be controlled or diminished here. Your music, your friendships, Your freedom, they'd all be yours to cherish. Olivia freed one hand to touch his cheek. Do you remember what I said when you asked why I offered to be your wife that first night? Vincent nodded. You said I had kind eyes and you were lonely. I also said I could read men. Her thumb brushed his cheekbone gently. What I saw in you that night, even through my fear and desperation, was goodness. I saw a man who might have taken advantage but chose compassion instead. She drew a shaky breath. These weeks have shown me I was right. You've given me shelter without demands, friendship without conditions, and something I thought I'd never have again, safety. Is that enough? Vincent asked softly. Safety and friendship. Olivia's smile was radiant through her tears. No, she whispered, it's not, but love would be. Vincent's heart soared. Are you saying yes? I'm saying I love you too, Olivia replied. And yes, Vincent Lawson, I will stay and be your wife, not from desperation this time, but from choice, from love. Vincent gathered her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a tender kiss that held both promise and reverence. When they finally parted, both were breathless. We should wait a proper amount of time, Olivia said, practicality reasserting itself. For appearance's sake. Vincent laughed softly. Olivia, we've been living on the same property for weeks. I think propriety has already taken quite a beating. Even so, she insisted. I want to do this right. A real courtship, a proper wedding. I want our beginning to be nothing like my past. Vincent pressed his forehead to hers. Whatever you want, it's yours. I'd court you for a year if you asked it. Not a year, Olivia said quickly. Perhaps a month. That would bring us to April. A spring wedding would be lovely. April it is, he agreed. News of their engagement spread quickly through Castle Dome. To Vincent's surprise, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Margaret Garrison immediately volunteered her garden for the ceremony, and other townspeople offered contributions: flowers from the Walsh sisters, a cake from Mrs. Peterson, music from the Harker brothers who played fiddle. The month of courtship passed in a blur of happiness for Vincent. He and Olivia rode into town together for Sunday services, took picnic lunches by the stream that ran through his property, and spent evenings planning their future. Olivia spoke of teaching music to the town's children, while Vincent shared ideas for expanding his horse breeding business. At Margaret's suggestion, Olivia stayed in town the week before the wedding, residing in the Garrison's guest room. Vincent found himself counting the hours until he could bring her home as his wife. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Wildflowers carpeted the hillsides around Castle Dome, and Margaret's garden was resplendent with early blooms. Vincent stood nervously before Reverend Phillips, Sheriff Blackburn at his side as best man, a development that had surprised both men but felt right somehow. When Olivia appeared on George Garrison's arm, standing in for her father, Vincent felt his breath catch. She wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Margaret had altered from her own wedding gown. Her dark hair was adorned with a crown of spring blossoms, and her face glowed with happiness. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows and rings, plain gold bands Vincent had ordered from Tucson. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed his bride to the cheers and applause of what seemed like the entire town. The celebration afterward was joyous. Tables groaned with potluck offerings, and the Harker brothers played lively tunes that soon had people dancing on the grass. Vincent, never much of a dancer, found himself swept into the music by Olivia's enthusiasm. As evening approached, they said their goodbyes and rode home together, Olivia on her own mare now, a wedding gift from Vincent. The small ranch looked different somehow as they approached, more like a home than it ever had before. Vincent helped Olivia down from her horse, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms to carry her across the threshold of his now their cabin. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, setting her gently on her feet inside. Olivia's eyes shone as she looked around the cabin, transformed by her touch over the past week's curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the table. "It's perfect," she whispered, turning to face him. "Everything is perfect." Later that night, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Vincent marveled at how completely his life had changed in the span of a few short months. From isolation to connection, from loneliness to love, all because a desperate woman had sought shelter in his barn during a winter storm. "What are you thinking?" Olivia murmured sleepily against his chest. "That I'm the luckiest man in the Arizona territory," he replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And that I'm very glad I decided to check the barn that night." "Providence," Olivia said with a smile. "We were meant to find each other." Vincent, never a man for mystical thinking, found he couldn't disagree. Whatever forces had brought Olivia to his door that winter night, he would be forever grateful. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges to the Lawsons. Vincent's horse breeding business flourished, especially after one of his stallions won a race in Tucson, bringing fame to the small ranch. Olivia established a thriving music school, first teaching in their home, then in a small building Vincent constructed specifically for her lessons. Their first child, a son they named Thomas, arrived a year after their wedding, bringing new meaning to their lives. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. Both children inherited their mother's musical talent and their father's quiet strength. Castle Dome grew along with the Lawson family. The mines remained productive, and the town expanded to include a proper school, where Olivia eventually taught music part-time. Vincent served on the town council, his thoughtful approach to problems earning respect from the community that had once seen him as a recluse. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent surprised Olivia with a piano, a beautiful instrument transported at great expense from San Francisco. Her tears of joy as her fingers touched the keys for the first time in over a decade were a memory he would always cherish. "How did you manage this?" she asked in wonder, playing a scale that filled their home with rich sound. "Been saving a little each month since our wedding day," Vincent admitted. "Figured 10 years deserved something special." Olivia left the piano bench to embrace him fiercely. "I never thought I'd play again," she whispered. "You've given me back a piece of my soul." That evening, their home filled with music as neighbors gathered to hear Olivia play. Vincent watched his wife, radiant with happiness, their children sitting proudly beside her, and felt a contentment so deep it almost overwhelmed him. Later, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Vincent and Olivia stood on their porch, looking out at the land that had nurtured their family and dreams. "You ever think about that night?" Olivia asked, leaning against him. "When you found me in the barn?" "Often," Vincent admitted. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I decided not to check the livestock that evening." "I would have frozen to death," Olivia said matter-of-factly. "Or I would have found my way to your door somehow. I believe we were meant to be, Vincent Lawson." Vincent tightened his arm around her waist. "You know, when you whispered that you'd be my wife if I let you stay, I thought you were delirious." "I was desperate," Olivia acknowledged. "But even in that state, I knew you were a good man. I just never imagined how good or how happy we could be." Vincent turned to face her, still struck by her beauty after all these years. "Any regrets about staying here instead of continuing to Idaho?" Olivia shook her head decisively. "Not a single one. This is where I was meant to be with you, with our children, with the life we've built together." As they stood wrapped in each other's arms under the vast Arizona sky, Vincent reflected on how a single act of kindness had changed everything. The lonely cowboy and the freezing woman had found in each other not just warmth and shelter, but a love that would sustain them through all the seasons of their lives. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and their family expanded to include grandchildren, as Castle Dome developed into a proper town, as they grew old together, surrounded by music and love, neither Vincent nor Olivia ever forgot that winter night when desperation and compassion had brought them together, forging a bond that would warm their hearts for the rest of their days.